This is Rising from the Shadows. What would your life look like if you stopped second guessing yourself, stopped playing small, and finally broke free from the cycles that have kept you stuck? Well, that's what the Ignite Momentum Practicum is all about. It's a 6-week transformational coaching experience designed to help you break through people-pleasing, self-doubt, and codependency once and for all. And here's the best part. You get to choose your path. You can matriculate through the one-on-one accelerator. It's private, high-touch coaching, you and me one-on-one. Weekly breakthrough calls, a custom action plan, deep mindset work, and real-time support to help you reclaim your power and rebuild your confidence. Option 2 is the group intensive. This is where transformation meets community. Weekly live sessions with a cohort of like-minded individuals, hot seat coaching, Q&A, bonus trainings, and a space where you're truly seen and supported without judgment. So whether you want personalized guidance or collective energy, the Ignite Momentum Practicum gives you the tools, structure, and support to stop circling the same patterns and start building unstoppable momentum. Ready to take the next step? Schedule your momentum call now at ignitingmomentum.co. That's ignitingmomentum.co. You'll find all the details there. Welcome back to Rising from the Shadows, the podcast where we are embarking on a journey of healing from trauma, reclaiming power, and thriving beyond the shadows of our past. I'm your host, Marlon Wesh, and today I'm thrilled to bring you another powerful conversation. My guest today is Telvin Peterson. Telvin is a licensed professional counselor. He's a writer, speaker, and educator dedicated to helping high-functioning Black men break free from shame, emotional suppression, and breaking free from survival mode. With over a decade of experience in correctional, clinical, and community mental health settings, he uses trauma-informed storytelling, somatic practices, and practical frameworks to guide men towards reclaiming their voice, power, and legacy. Telvin, welcome to the show.
Hey, Marlon, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'd like to open the door for some storytelling, for the telling of your story. Can you share a little
hmm
bit about who you are today? What was the journey that brought you here, and where do you aspire to be in the future? And feel free to take it in any direction that feels meaningful to you.
Okay. Um, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. Majority of my childhood anyway. Um, Seen a lot of different things, experienced a lot of different things. Went through a period of homelessness, stayed in a homeless shelter with my mom. Just me and her at one point. Been through and experienced domestic violence, like in a perspective as a child. And watching my mom kind of go through certain things. And at a very young age, I kind of had to learn how to be a protector and be a person to be there for my mom. And then I had siblings, so I was kind of almost like that second, um, I guess, second parental, or rather the third parental figure for them at one point. So growing up with the experience I have, um, it's kind of just catapulted me into a place where I almost inherently became a protector. And I think too that's because of my size and then being like experiencing what it was to experience domestic violence as a child who couldn't defend for themselves. Kind of had to play a role where I helped my mom where she in a position to help herself. So um, I ended up being I was always like a big kid. But just by the nature of my size, being just a big man, I always kind of played that role of a protector, and I had to, step into that role many of times, throughout the years. Um, my father, he was always in my life. but I didn't live with him, so I didn't really get the learn the things that a man would learn, from his dad. Granted, my dad was in my life, but the only time I really got to see him was like over the summer. So that's what that was like. But my dad, he always worked, so I spent a lot of time by myself during that time. So kind of being not necessarily being the only child, but it was just me and my dad. It was just me and my mom for the most part. And it was me and my brother, and me and my brother and sister, and then the dynamics of her relationship. Their husband was kind of on and off, so I always kind of stepped in some way, whether it was emotionally or financially. Um, Played sports in high school. I think that kind of changed the trajectory of my life. I was never a bad kid, but I was in an environment where I just started to do things, everyone else was doing, and majority of people who I was around wasn't doing things that kids that age should be doing. Um, but I got into football. That kind of kept me straight, and just like every little kid, they want to be in the NFL. Got to a point. I got a football scholarship. Ended up tearing my ACL, tearing my meniscus. Um, had two surgeries, three or four tears, and kind of had to hang it up. And it was a point where I didn't know what I was going to do. But I kind of stepped into the field of helping people, and that's kind of where I've been for the last more than 10 years, really. But I've always been in this space of helping people, and I think that's because I think I'm a teacher and guide by nature. But like I was saying earlier about being a protector, I've always been in that role, whether it's by choice or not. So coming into where I'm at today, it's ironic. I work in a prison. I'm a therapist. I'm a therapist in the Department of Corrections, and I come across so many different people from different walks of life, and I find myself like really empathizing with them, but also understanding that there's not a lot of people who look like me who are in a position to help. So I often get a lot of them men, they may not open up to many people until they see someone like themselves, and they start to open up and share their stories and things that they've experienced. And a lot of the guys, yeah, people do some bad things, but then given the circumstances, it's like, if these guys had a different reality, things would be a lot different for them.
Mhm.
But even that, just understanding, these are people too. These people need help, and then having someone who never spoke to anyone about their traumas to actually sit down, talk to someone about their traumas, someone who understands, and someone who doesn't invalidate their experiences. Um, so it's a interest. It's been an interesting ride. Definitely a rewarding ride, and I definitely get to learn more about myself.
Thanks for sharing that. The thing that you said about a lot of these people, if they were in different circumstances, they wouldn't be where they are. I fully relate to that. I think all of us need to be a lot more humble about the fact that we're just lucky, right place, right time. I
Hmm.
came from a really abusive family of origin. Um, it was bad. But the one thing that I believe kind of saved me was also another thing that somewhat handicapped me later in life was I was homeschooled from first grade until I was college age. I grew up in a religious cult setting, so we were isolated from the world.
Hmm.
And I think and reflect all the time, what if I grew up in that same abusive situations, but I went to public school and I was exposed to, you know, educators that didn't understand what was going on, other kids that weren't being supported. Like, where would I have ended up? I mean, like,
Hmm.
I was thirsty for love. I probably certainly have joined the gang, right? Because it would have, provided a family structure that I so desperately wanted.
Right.
And the
Yeah.
fact that the one thing that educationally handicapped me for so long is also the thing that realistically probably saved my life at the same time. It's a bizarre thing. And
Hmm.
so, you know, I try to remember that most of us are only like one missed paycheck away from homelessness and just like
Right.
one emotionally um, untenable situation from losing it all. Um,
Hmm.
you talked about invalidation. I'd like to talk about that a little bit. Um, how the cost of invalidation affects people that are already suffering and just makes it worse, and
Hmm.
how does one push through that, especially someone that's incarcerated and they're probably there because they've to some degree have experienced a whole lot of invalidation of their in their lives, no one listening, no one understanding, and so just succumb to like this is how it's got to be. How does
Hmm.
someone like push back that to self-validation?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really it's really tough to experience it, let alone to experience that, all throughout your life and never have anyone to validate you. So when someone does, you really don't know what to do with it. Um, to be in a space where you invalidated is probably much better for you to get into a different environment, right? But it's easy to say that than to actually make that happen, right? So the first thing I tell people to do is first validate yourself, right? So you know how you feel. You can validate your own feelings, but also understand you may feel something one day, but then that feeling may change just as well as your thoughts. But never rely on someone else to confirm or deny what it is that what your experience. Because you could be in a household with the same people, but everyone report different experiences,
Yeah.
right? We all look through different lenses. So we have to be empathetic of everyone and also understand that some people, everyone has blind spots, right? But there's some people who have blinders as a way to protect themselves. And they might not see things in the same way that you see things because how they go about protecting themselves may look a lot different. Right. So I always preach self compassion. So regardless of anything, right, you're in an environment that invalidating. And sometimes there's nothing you can do about it, especially as a child, right? You really can't fend for yourself. So you're in this space where no one believes you, uh, no one is, you might feel like no one don't even care about you. But in those moments, right, you have to lean within, lean on yourself and understand that your experiences are your experiences, right? So being self compassionate, treating yourself how you would treat your friends, and but really just also having people you can talk to. Right, not everyone has someone to talk to, but just putting yourself in a position where you can find someone to talk to. I know when I was younger, people would go on chat lives and talk to random people, like in when internet like it not first came out, but chat rooms
Hmm.
was a big thing. Now
Yeah.
we have things like 988, like the suicide hotline. Um, but we have social media, we have Reddit, we have all different, I guess, blogs and things like that you can talk to and find people who are experiencing the same things you are to at least help you process that if you're not talking to a professional.
Hmm.
I always encourage people to talk to a professional because there's specific modalities out there that can help you, specifically DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, that treats things like distress tolerance, emotional regulation. What's the other one?
I'm interested
Distress
in that.
tolerance, emotional regulation.
I feel like, I've been in therapy probably since I was like 17, 18 years old. And over the years, I've kind of heard of CBT as being like the holy grail of therapy. I never
Hmm.
found that quite effective for me. Um, and just recently heard about DBT. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that modality is it may be more effective for that type of stressors that you're talking about versus
Hmm.
other ones?
Yeah. So the biggest difference between DBT and And CBT more focuses on the behavior and the thought. So the idea is if you can change the thought, you can change the behavior. Whereas DBT is looking more at like paradoxes, so or dialectic. So what is something that can be both true and false at the same time, or what else can be true about the situation?
Hmm.
It's also a form of behavioral therapy, but it's looking at a situation. Let's say someone might be upset about what someone said, but usually they have high emotional reactivity, and typically that high reactive emotionality or reactivity comes from or started in a place where their emotions have been invalidated. So just think about it as someone who's in an environment where there's constant gaslighting.
Hmm.
So that would usually contribute to someone who has a high reactivity to their emotions. So any form of distress is highly elevated. Um, and the idea is to get them to see things a little bit differently and get them to think of ways to handle it in different ways. So the biggest thing about DBT is utilization of mindfulness, which is really about being present in the moment. The idea about being present in that moment is whenever you experiences these things, you're able to settle your mind, right? And I talked about when my bio talked about somatics. There are certain things in DBT that like stopping and breathing, taking breaths, like all that too is still part of mindfulness. But the idea behind that is to settle your essential nervous system. Um, and there's different things you can do. Like I know some people may um, dip their head, flash their head in cold water, splash cold water on their face. I've even saw people um, bite into a lemon because that the reactivity and what that does, how that activates the central nervous system, especially when they're feeling triggered. And learning how to tolerate just acute forms of distress to chronic forms of distress and developing protocols around those things, how to manage your emotions and handle relational things like relationships and how to be validated, what validation is and the different types.
Hmm. Yeah, I found for an intellectualizer like myself that felt more, like holding a ice in my hand, to just like bring me back to
Mhm.
earth. That things like that, or oh, I don't remember when you like tense up your muscles. What's that called? Like progressive.
Yeah, aggressive muscle relaxation.
Yeah, like that helped me more than like breathing exercises.
Hmm.
And like you mentioned, there's a whole array of that. Um,
Hmm.
and I it's crazy how I spent so much of my life. Um, I guess trying to work from thoughts out, but I really needed to feel like safe in my body into my thoughts and like DBT definitely helped with that. Um, I was really excited to read your bio. You talked about your work with guiding high functioning, specifically black men, through shame, survival mode, and emotional suppression. Was there a pivotal moment in your life or career when you realized that the traditional model of masculinity was doing more harm than good and there needed to be a shift in that approach, specifically dealing with people in our community?
I don't know if there's a specific moment, but I just remember just thinking about some things, and I heard people talk about toxic masculinity, and I've heard like different conversations about it. I've also read W. Du Bois, I think, The Soul of Black Folks. Um, I think he used the term double consciousness, and when I started to think about masculinity, that came up. It's something in the book. I can't remember exactly what it was. But it was just this idea that I think in the book it was talking about being American is different than being a Black American,
Hmm.
and African Americans have to kind of straddle that line. Like you are essentially American, but being American isn't the same thing as being a Black American. So it made me look at toxic masculinity and who is that really for? Like, what is it? Who is that referring to? Um, so over the years, I've had that thought was on my mind. And I read something years later, just talked about how black men specifically have to show up in masculine terms and be the breadwinner, be the head of household, which typically means they're not in the home, but also thinking about the laws that were placed in the government assistance that was that wasn't awarded to families, right? It was only awarded to those who didn't have a man in the household. And I just remember as a kid just hearing adults talk about certain things, and the man had to hide. He had to go stay somewhere else for a couple of
Right.
days until so and so came in. Then they came back, and that's the only way they could get help. And then just learning what that meant later on in life. So that kind of reinforcing things. But then also this dynamic of men are supposed to be present. Like the family wants you to be present, and you have one side saying, you must do this, and the other side say you must do this. So it kind of leaves, black men in an awkward position. And then if you're not present, then you're not a good father. But then if you are present, you have to, do the things you need to do. But sometimes it may be in a position where you're not where you want to be. Then it's pressure to show up in a certain way. It's pressure to make a certain amount of money. Um, and then if you're in an environment where you're not making as much money, then it's possible that you could experience some form of being emasculated, not only by sometimes your spouse, but just by society
In
itself.
general, yeah.
So it's a lot of things that I've experienced over the years, and I kind of seen that other men interacted with it. Um, but I empathize with black men because obviously I'm a black man myself. Um, but I've always had a wise mind. Um, and just being maybe the earliest in is elementary school, I got to understood the dynamics I saw in my community with the adults and kind of understood what was going on, even though I didn't have great understanding at that time. And really helped me understand people more and the dynamics of what's actually going on.
Mhm.
So those are the things I think those the combination of those things kind of helped me see masculinity, but black masculinity in a different way.
Yeah, that's that the talk about the double bind of of being the present father, husband, and then also being tasked with um, the financial viability of your family unit, whereas so many other family units have, we talk about generational wealth all the time, and we think it's like,
Mhm.
oh, so and so left millions of dollars to, their kids, and that may be true, but in my past work as a financial advisor, at one point, my firm, I think I had about 95% of my firm were black clients, not for any reason, but that they saw someone that looked like them and they decided to work with me. And I would have
Mhm.
these conversations about generational wealth all the time with them, and I would say all the time, like, you're thinking too big. Generational wealth is as much as saving a couple of $1,000s. So when your kid gets their first apartment, they don't have to buy furniture for that apartment. Those are the little things that rack up. Somebody being able to go a little further for work because their family was able to set them up and like cover the cost of the move across the country and things like that. And that um, that compounds over generations of not having to worry about little things. Um, that
Mhm.
allows people to be bolder and braver in making decisions because they're not in that survival mode, even if they're not wealthy, but there is some level of like safety net. And that's certainly something that historically black families have not had in the country. And even as we're um, to a larger degree. I mean, it feels crazy to say because it's not entirely true, but more um, financially equitable at this time. That's debatable. Um,
Mhm.
the one thing that comes up all the time is how that system and the patriarchy hurts everyone. So for a conscious black man who sees themselves beyond just that stereotypical, I'm here to provide, I'm here to physically protect and have all these roles and be the disciplinarian and everything like that, and wants to be emotionally available, values emotional intelligence. In some ways, the partners that we're looking for, they're saying they want a partner like that, but then the conditioning kicks in and saying like, I've had all these
Yeah.
generations of saying like, this is what masculinity looks like, this is what femininity looks like. We have these religious pictures, we have these social pictures of it all, and your conditioning fights back against like what's best for you,
Mhm.
and that cycle just
Yeah.
continues with like picking the partner that goes against what you really need, but what your conditioning says is what's for you. Um, and it's honestly quite depressing to see how like it's a journey, and it's not something that's going away in 1 2 generations. It certainly takes
Mhm.
a multitude of people not living in survival mode anymore to have, I guess, the courage to move past that conditioning. um, I believe a lot of that has to do with shame. You talk about shame, the purpose of shame, the
Mhm.
cost of shame. I was watching one of your videos on your TikTok page, and you were talking about how shame actually um, solves a purpose, and but there's also cost for it. Can you talk a little bit more about what you meant by that?
Mhm. Yeah. I attended a training and it talked about black shame. So I said, okay, finally something for us. Um, and it got to some psychoeducation part of it, and it explained that shame serves a purpose. And I knew like all emotions serve some type of purpose, but I was really intrigued by that. And it mentioned how we experience shame early on, usually by our parents. And shame is used as a way to, in essence, to control you. Um, but it's used in a way to, the way I was looking at it was, at least for our parents, it controls us in a way not to embarrass them.
Right.
So that shame is then projected onto us. So one of the examples I like to use is a black mom tell you when you be going in this store, don't ask for nothing, don't look at me, don't do da 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 da, right? That whole gist. So that is their way of protecting themselves from being shamed, or you acting a fool, or acting like you got some home training. Um, and that prevents us from doing a lot of things. But I think what also happens is, so let me stick on that part, right? So it prevents us from doing things. It may prevent us from doing things that may be embarrassing to our family, maybe embarrassing to ourselves, that may put us in jail, right? Your friends want to go do this thing, you know you shouldn't do it, but you might thinking about not necessarily the consequence, but you might think about how it may shame your family or what your mother may think or what whoever may think, so you might not do it. Or you may just hide it altogether. So that's kind of the way it kind of controls us in a way, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But what it also does is that it can create immobilization, right? Because it can keep us stuck. It can prevent us from doing things we really want to do out of fear that we may be rejected, we may be abandoned, all these other things. It can lead to things so like imposter syndrome. It serves a purpose, but what most people don't think about shame is shame. It gives you, well, all emotions rather. It serves a purpose. It's there to tell you something. It's there to communicate things to you. And it's there to communicate things to other people. When you're experiencing shame, it's telling you that you're afraid to do something. But then you have to figure out why you're afraid to do that. If we all kind of look at shame in that way, we understand that there's power in shame. We can take that And I like to use the word sublimation, which is a defense mechanism that people use not to feel shame, to do something else. Like someone who likes to anatomy, like to cut up animals. So they might not do it. They might not cut up animals. They may become a butcher. They may become a doctor. They like to fight, right? They might become a boxer. They may study martial arts. Like these are more pro-social ways to do the things you enjoy. But what it also does is kind of escapes shame from taboo
Mm-hmm.
or unacceptable
Mm-hmm.
things.
That's interesting. Can so essentially, okay. You saying that like shame is telling us something. Uh, what is the? Can you talk about the process of like helping someone distinguish between um, what's the shame voice and like the voice of truth or the constructive voice telling you another behavior needs to be done?
Hmm. So I know a lot of times.
If this podcast speaks to you, if you're on the path of healing, reclaiming your voice, or just trying to piece together who you really are after surviving the unthinkable, I want to invite you into a space where you don't have to do it alone. Join our Facebook group created for survivors, cycle breakers, and people rebuilding themselves from the inside out. In there, we go deeper. Weekly prompts, live streams, raw conversations, and a whole lot of people who just get it. No pretending, no pressure, just truth, growth, and community. Search Rising from the Shadows, The Path to Reclaiming You on Facebook, or hit the link in the show notes to join the
People
community.
get shame and guilt confused. And guilt simply means I did something wrong, whereas shame means I am something wrong. So it's more reflected in inward, like you are a bad person, or I am a bad person, rather than I did something bad. And it's really hard to for a lot of people to distinguish between the two. But what a lot of people do is they may rationalize a good behavior, they may rationalize a bad behavior. But what that does is simply protecting their ego. So let's say if a person robs someone, they might rationalize with themselves, well, the person didn't need it, they had insurance, or this business had insurance, so they wouldn't really lost money. Right? They don't think about the inconveniences, they don't think about the wrongdoing. They just think about they may understand what they did wasn't right, but they may rationalize it as in, okay, I had a need and I had to meet that need. Whatever that need may be, whether it was to get more drugs, where they were feeling sick, or it was to get this thing to get money to provide it for their family. And I'm using these examples because these are all the things I hear, working in the Department of Corrections. But it can be different even in relationships. People may step out in a relationship because they felt like they wasn't getting enough intimacy or physical touch. They feel like they weren't being validated emotionally, and they may step out because someone validated their feelings. Where at home, all they do is get yelled at. So I hear these different things from both men and women. But shame. I think it all boils down to like the difference between just the shame voice. It's really it's almost like a person, just their belief that they are a bad person. Like they're not good. They're not meant to be. All these different things that these thoughts they have that is really focused on them just being a bad person, rather than they did something bad or they made a mistake, whatever the case may be. And then we just get to a point where our ego starts to kick in to defend ourselves or protect ourselves. So instead of someone saying, you know, or accepting guilt, um, or even remorse, they may just rationalize what they did. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
rationalization, makes sense in their minds. But what that's really doing is protecting them from feeling guilt, from feeling remorse,
Mm-hmm.
because that may be too painful for them.
A lot of the stories that my guests come on and tell is having escaped from a narcissistic romantic relationship, and we tell our stories, we have our hurts about it, and all very, very valid. A part of that dynamic that I don't think a lot of people talk about, and this doesn't take away from victims like myself and other victims that I come across all the time, is how the role of shame plays in a person with narcissistic tendencies in their inability and capability of accepting wrong that they did and making amends, um, because of the story that I am a bad person versus I did a bad thing. Um, can you talk a
Mhm.
little bit about that dynamic? Because I know a lot of our listeners are always like I don't understand how this person, could do these things, could look me in the face and lie to me and gaslight me and make me feel I'm crazy. Can you talk about how crazy shame can make you how much of of a distressor it is that people will go to any lengths to escape it?
Mhm. Yeah. Um, people, all of it is people's response to shame is to protect themselves from that shame. And there are different forms or different ways people protect themselves from even the potential of being shamed. And for high functioning people, it could be their experience of imposter syndrome, which is simply, a person feels inadequate despite, despite their capabilities and accomplishments. So they may not apply for a position. They may not go after, um, take on certain projects. Sometimes they might take on too much out of fear. If they don't do these things, then,
Mm,
they may be shunned. Shame could turn someone into a people pleaser. Shame can not necessarily turn someone into a narcissist, um, but shame can be part of the driving force around why people won't take accountability, why people may not accept, what they've done. Um, Shame can turn a person to be really angry. It can turn someone to really act in rage. I don't think that's really talked about enough, but sometimes the reason why
mhm,
people get upset is because they're feeling shame.
mhm,
And a lot of times it can become really violent, right? So if this person embarrassed you, then you're gonna feel probably something really intensely, and that something is likely to be anger. And just the way people allow themselves to be consumed with anger can be very dangerous. I've worked with men who become very possessive, um, that is driven by shame, and a lot of times it doesn't start, with their partners, and usually it starts, in their childhood, and it shows up in different ways. Like I was saying earlier, you come from an environment where you were invalidated, and every day, there's gaslighting, and you begin to question yourselves, right? And then you start to develop these dialogues like, am I a bad person? I don't belong. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be with this family. My family doesn't love me, right? A lot of this negative self-talk, which then becomes belief, and these beliefs become how you interact with the world and how you interact with other people. So even if these beliefs aren't true, you believe them to be true. And now if someone does something that triggers those thoughts and that triggers these past emotions, then that anger, starts to come up, right? So
mhm,
that's projected, onto this other person, and it's relived. And a lot of times it becomes very, it turns dark. I remember I had a client. I said, "Hey, that I work in a prison, and from what you're telling me now, you're on your way there. Just and he hasn't done. At least he didn't tell me, but he didn't do anything physically aggressive at that time. But I said, hey, the way you're thinking about this right now, if we can't get this figured out now or soon, like you're gonna have some real issues. And then one day he kind of just dropped out. Found out later um he got locked up.
Mm.
And he called me and told me that, and now he's back. So I'm pretty sure I may see him. I may run into him in prison.
Mm.
But there are certain things that I can tell by how a person responds to someone else, where they're at mentally or where they could go based on those things that they say, based on certain patterns. And a lot of that was wrapped in shame. But this is also a person who didn't who didn't how do I put it? They wanted what they want, but they will be upset if that person did it.
Uh,
Um,
mm,
kind of what somebody will describe as a narcissist, but
mm,
I think this is it's a big misconception about a narcissistic personality. Narcissist people who develop narcissistic personalities usually come from a specific type of environment that breeds that. And a lot of times, those type of environments aren't really emotionally safe. And it's
mhm.
probably in some ways there isn't any form of um, validation in some cases in accountability.
Mhm.
Um, but understanding our people, I know that especially for single mothers, it's hard for them to hold their children accountable because they're working, they're
Yeah.
exhausted, they're
Yeah.
burnt out. And sometimes one of the oldest child has to be the one to act as a surrogate parent.
Yeah.
So shame is definitely a big thing.
Yeah. I wish
And
we had more
it can get very
conversations
scary.
about shame. I,
Yeah.
for me, shame was the thing that kept me as a people pleaser for so many years, and
Mm-hmm.
and me being able to learn to like reject shame is what got me out.
Mm-hmm.
In one way, me getting in touch with my anger, not in a destructive way, but in a way like no, you don't get to make me feel bad for having this boundary. You don't get to make me feel bad
Mm-hmm.
for speaking my mind when I'm being mistreated. That's not mine to,
You're right.
that's
Yeah.
not mine to take. It's not on me to feel shameful that my, 6-year-old is having a age appropriate meltdown at the store because I told him he couldn't get candy this trip. Like, you're not going to make me feel
Mm-hmm.
like a bad parent that this child is acting like a child. And, like, no, I'm not going to be
Mm-hmm.
embarrassed about that. If you need to go ahead of me, go ahead of it. Just like that idea of just rejecting shame has,
Yeah.
like, literally gave me my power back. Because what I
Mm-hmm.
found was that most people in the world are not only moving in the world with shame, they're moving in the world with the assumption that everybody is moving in the same way. And they're just hoping that your
Mm-hmm.
shame is bigger than their shame so that they have a more favorable outcome. And when that clicked for
Yeah.
me, I was like, holy shit. Like literally,
Mm-hmm.
as long as you don't let somebody put the shame that they're feeling or that they would feel in a certain situation onto you, like you cannot be controlled. And that
Yeah.
was insane for me. Um, you talk about high functioning men. What do you mean by that?
Okay. So how functioning men is just simply men who are doing a good job, but they think they aren't. Um, because there's such a thing as high functioning depression. People will look like they got it all together. They may be running an entire business. That
I
business is
know a
making
little
them a
bit
lot
about
of
that.
money, but they're likely depressed. So it's really a man who may look like they have it all together, but they're struggling, and they might not be saying anything about it. And what I wanted to say, just based off of what you were saying before this last question is that you can hear shame in everyday conversations. Like you may be talking to someone about something, and I know in our community you might hear, "Well, you better than me. I can't do that."
Right?
And and not every
You love it,
single
I like
time
it. You like it, I
that's
love it.
shame, but right. But you can tell. But you'll see like we do a lot of shame talk. Um, and now we hear the word crash out a lot, and a lot of people crash out in a lot of cases because they've been embarrassed. Men and women. Like emotional intelligence is a big thing. That word is thrown around a lot. I don't think people really understand what it means. Um, and it's not just understanding your emotions; it's also understanding other people's emotions and understanding when and when not to say certain things, act certain things. One of the I guess I don't know how it's not a read the room.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, if you understand what that means, you kind of understand like what emotional intelligence is. I don't think that completely illustrates emotional intelligence, but you're at least able to read the room. You can get a lot done. You'll be at least you have a high emotional quotient perspective or higher rather.
Yeah. One of the I give a keynote, and in it I go over what I've coined as the five epiphanies, and one of it, which was essentially we're talking about the shame part, but I talk about it being the cost of freedom, being able to accept negative consequences. Um,
Hmm.
Now that we're talking about it, I'm like, oh wow, we are talking about shame. Like for me, when I you know got the courage to tell my previous spouse that I wanted a divorce. I was dealing with so much shame. And it wasn't like fake shame. These were things that I knew would actually happen. What would that look like?
Hmm.
Because my kids were young. What did that look like? Because I'm a black man and she's a white woman. What does that look like to a family where secrets are like nobody? It's all about appearances and things like that. There were all these things where I knew power dynamics were different, like financial dynamics. There was like so much that I knew um, um, were real consequences that I would have to deal with by doing this. And, I had the option, right? Just to stay in the same dynamic that was quite literally draining the life of me. I have a picture I keep framed of me in that relationship, and then me about 6 months after leaving it, and like physiologically, you can't tell the difference. I was literally a shell of myself, but I couldn't tell that then. I couldn't see it then.
Hmm.
So I made the difference, and I paid the cost of it. You know, completely lost of a social circle. Lost family, lost friends, like everyone, like literally everyone except for two people in my life.
Hmm.
And that was a real cost. The isolation was a cost. The uh, the constant attacks were a cause, and not just like oh, this sucks, but like real cause. I don't know if you can tell behind me, but I got a friend back there, and I was matched with Coco because the all of the effects of that. I was eventually diagnosed with CPTSD. Um, but I don't look back and say that I made the wrong decision. And like I'm very much
Hmm.
alive because of this decision, but it's a
Yeah.
real, real cost. How do you communicate to people that that toll is worth paying?
Hmm. I think most people are just too afraid to step into the unknown. Um, And a lot of people would rather stay in a familiar discomfort than to step into a discomfort that's not predictable. Um, you're likely to, like, once you make up your mind to do what's best for you, to do what's in your best interest. Like, people make decisions that's in their best interest all the time. Um, Regardless of what people think, they may feel some guilt and some shame afterwards, but we do it every day. And I talk to a lot of guys, and
If you're listening to this and you've got a story to tell, whether it's your personal story of healing and reclaiming your voice or rising from rock bottom, or you're a professional with powerful insight into trauma, identity, resilience, or transformation, then I want to hear from you. Rising from the Shadows is more than just a podcast. It's a space where truth is honored, power is reclaimed, and stories heal. If you have something to share that could empower others to stop shrinking and start rising, I'd love for you to apply to be a guest on the show. Just head to tellmystory.risingfromtheshadows.com to submit your application. Let's rise together, one voice, one breakthrough, one story at a time.
prison who they would say they feel a lot of shame because they chose drugs over their family. And I have to talk to them like, hey, like, you made a decision that you felt like was in your best interest at that time. You may have looked at it later and rationalized, like, what did I actually do? But in that moment, you did what you felt like was best for you, right? You had a decision to make, and you probably was feeling some type of distress, some type of discomfort that probably wasn't worth it based on the decision you made. Probably wasn't worth it for the long run, or wasn't it wasn't worth what you lost, but it was enough to help you get through whatever experience you were
Yeah,
having, whether it was
yeah.
a physiological experience within the body, or if it was an experience that helped you cope with something, or to help you get out of a situation, whatever the case may be. It may have looked like, you forgot about your family, you forgot about this person or these people, but at the end of the day, you made that choice. You had to live with it, and it can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. I thought it was strange when I heard someone who experienced trauma say, like, some significant trauma, big trauma, say, that was the best thing that could have happened to me. If that
Yeah.
didn't happen, I wouldn't be the person I am today. And I had to sit with that. Like, you telling me this happened, and this happened,
Yeah.
but you're grateful it happened. Um, and I used to hear life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you.
For you. Yeah.
Like that, hearing what this person said helped me make a lot more sense out of that statement.
Mhm.
A life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. But those rough things, they're gonna happen. And making a choice like that to put yourself first may be it may be hurtful, may be painful. Um, but I got to a point where I learned to accept and appreciate my own experiences, because I know that if it wasn't for my experience, I wouldn't be able to A, tell those stories,
Mhm.
and B, help someone through similar things. Um, I don't think I would have known or had enough life experience to help someone through the things that they have experienced. Granted, I haven't experienced everything that, the people I encounter experience, but there are some similarities, right? That there are probably some things that they shared with me that also happened to me that I might not disclose to them.
Mhm.
But I could definitely relate to those things. And if it wasn't for me experiencing what I'm experiencing, I wouldn't be able to help or just have the skills and knowledge as being someone who lived in it to help people work through it and get themselves to a place where they can not only be high functioning, but actually step outside of survival mode and live. Because a lot of people living in survival mode don't even know it.
Yeah. Mm. What's the first step to stepping out of that high functioning, but dying on the inside to actually thriving.
You got to be honest. You got to be honest. You got to recognize that you're in it. Ironically, um, it wasn't until recently that I realized I was still living in survival mode. I did a lot of work. I've done a lot of healing. I'm still healing. But it just there's so when we go through our own healing process, there may be specific areas in which we focus on, and that's not a bad thing. But what happens is if you become hyper focused on these things,
Hmm.
you kind of forget about these other areas.
Yeah.
So I know for me, I miss how I realized I was in survival mode is because I realized I would start things, I wouldn't finish it. I will get very close to the end,
Yeah.
then I'll start to tense up, I'll freeze. And, I remember doing this as a kid. And this, like, I think I mentioned these experiences as a kid. I may or may not have spoken about it in therapy, but I don't really talk about it. I don't really think about it as much. But as I think about, certain defining moments, I realize as an adult, I'm not in that type of danger. But usually when it comes to a project, something specific, I stall every single time. I've written at least, I don't know, I've written at least, I know, I'll say two. I've written two books over the past 3 years. One book I got to the point where I met with a publisher, kind of got cold feet. Um, so I said, you know what, I'm gonna start a new book. I started that. Really, I think I'm done for the most part, but a couple other things I want to do. Um, and I'm not actively working on it, but there's other reasons why. But even if I'm not writing, I just realized that I start a lot of projects that I don't finish, and I had to be honest with myself, like why, understanding why, and I understood I freeze in those moments. So I never would have thought this would be related to the things that I'm trying to heal from. But actually sitting down and doing some deep thought, like I said, you have to be honest, you have to do some introspection. And in those moments, at least for me, it came to me. I opened myself up to receive, and I received that. These are the reasons why. And now that I know that, I'm actively working on these things. But you just have to be honest with yourself first and foremost. Having taken what I do, I know a lot of people may not do it or it may not work for them, but for me specifically, going for walks,
Yeah.
taking that time to think, you know, listen to music or not listen to music during that time, but going on nature walks and really having those conversations with yourself, and getting brutally honest. Because it's just you and yourself, nobody else, right? You can lie to somebody else, but don't lie to yourself.
That's so real because while you were saying that, I was just thinking, and I guess I've never thought about it before until now, is that I would do this as a kid, um, um, and I'm realizing that I would have an interest, but if I saw someone like doing the thing that I was doing or wanting to do, and they were uh, better or had less effort in picking it up, I wouldn't allow myself to compete even internally to like for excellence. I would just like move on to something else. I have this memory of um, my younger brother. So I was the first. I took piano lessons first, and my younger brother is just like gifted, and he would just like pick it up like that. And it was funny that I used to hide I used to hide like all the easy sheet music, and so only like the difficult one was out there, and he would just like learn it. It was like the best fuck you to me,
Yeah,
right? Like he would
yeah.
just like learn it, and it just like so easily. And so I stopped learning how to read sheet music and just like played by ear, because I didn't,
Mhm.
for whatever reason, I wouldn't do the discipline thing of just like getting better
Mhm.
at it. Um, and even until now, like if I do something, it's because I know that I'm, even if I'm a beginner at it, I know that I can relatively easily excel at it. Um, Above average. There's not much
Mhm.
that I do that I allow myself to suck at for too long. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, like I think about that too, and the walks like there is such a real thing. I refuse to let myself rest, and I
Yeah.
know I have an acronym that I have written on my whiteboard, CRC, um, or CCR. It's I know that for me to optimize my function, I need to create, I need to connect with people, and then I need to rest in that order. And then I wonder why I'm working on a problem and I can't find the answer. Like I need to take a nap. Like
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
need to take a
Yeah.
walk and I need to take a nap, but it feels like you're
Yeah.
wasting time, like I'm running out of time and running out of time. But that's
Yeah.
literally when
Yeah.
you get
Yeah.
the answer. Um,
Mhm. I
um,
know that song all too well.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we could talk forever about that, but this was a great conversation. Um, at the end of all of it, is there one key thing that you would, key lesson that you would want the listeners to take away um, from this conversation, from your journey, from your experience?
Yeah. When it comes to shame, I really want people to understand how much power there is in how much power there is in anger. Anger is a very powerful emotion, but not from what most people think. Specifically, anger is a great motivator, a great motivator. But you have to be able to use that effectively or transmute that. And even with the shame,
Mhm.
you will find, and you said it, I don't think you realized it, but there's just so much power in shame. And real, uh, once you understand how to move from shame to power, it's like a next level of confidence you get, right? When you no longer allow someone else to project their own shame onto you, because people do that, and sometimes you accept it, you won't even realize it. And you, especially if you're an empath, you may even take on other people's
Yeah,
emotions
yeah.
or other people's idea about a certain thing, and then next thing you know, that stops you from doing it. Let's say you said you wanted to do something, but they said, well, this is too hard. And now you start thinking, well, they might be right. Or I'm going to fail. You start telling yourself these different things. Or I'm not good at it. Or I suck at this. Now, you might have had, your confidence may have been here when it comes to executing that idea. But after you spoke to someone, now you just like, I don't think I want to do it anymore. Right.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's just the fear of failure.
Yeah.
But when it comes to failing, that's how you learn. I remember in college, undergrad, I took this philosophy class. Yeah, I think it was deductive reasoning. It had to do something to do with logic. And there was this book we had to read, and it was a quote in it. But I think the book was like Learning How to Fail. And that really helped me understand, ironically, math and statistics a whole lot better. Um, but then also helped me understand life a whole lot better. There's a lot of life lessons in that book as well. And the things the things that we are afraid of are the things that we should tackle head on,
Hmm.
because at the end of it is power.
Yeah.
And once you move from shame to power, you become unstoppable.
Absolutely. Well, this was an incredible conversation. I know that everyone's going to be walking away with so much insight. Where can the listeners connect with you, learn more about your work, or support your mission?
So right now I am building my website. It's not up yet. I can be found on Psychology Today. Just look up Telvin Peterson. You'll find me there. I have social media. I'm not really active on those accounts. I do have a TikTok. And I can't even remember the name. I think it's Mr. P Speaks or Mr. P Talks or something like that. Um, like I said, I'm not really on social media, but you can find me on Psychology Today. That's probably one of the best ways to reach out to me.
Okay. And we'll be sure to put that information in the show notes. But thank you again so much for sharing your insights with us today. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of Rising from the Shadows. Remember that healing isn't the absence of shadows, it's learning to thrive in your very own light. So rise today, rise tomorrow, rise always, because the shadow doesn't stand a chance. Until next time, take care. If you're an event organizer, HR leader, or educator looking to bring a powerful voice to your stage, someone who speaks truth, ignites momentum, and empowers your audience to rise above what's held them back, then I want to talk to you. My keynote, Rising from the Shadows, is more than a talk. It's a transformative experience that shows people how to stop shrinking, start healing, and stand fully in their story. I've lived it. I teach it, I walk people through it. So if you're building a lineup of speakers who don't just talk but move people, head over to marlonwesh.com to create something unforgettable for your audience.